And on Thursdays, I co-host with my absolutely fabulous wingman, Nick Filippo, who's the Chief Customer Officer for Sandstone Technology, where we talk all things digital transformation, leadership, lived experience, you name it, with some really, really incredible guests. Mick, it is so great to be here with you again. This is our penultimate episode for the year before Christmas.
Alex, good afternoon and hello to all of our listeners. Absolutely thrilled to be back here co-hosting Digital First, a banking transformation series with you. We've been blessed to have so many wonderful guests join us thus far on the program, and today, of course, is absolutely no exception. But before we do introduce today's very special guest, let's take a quick look at who's next on next week's program. On screen, what you can see, we're very excited to say that we have in exclusive for our European market. We'll be joined by one of the world's most recognised fintech thought leaders, authors, commentators, and as he dubs himself, an all-round troublemaker. This is Chris Skinner, of course. We're very much looking forward to that one. But now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's guest, our very first decorated executive from Vietnam, who is based in the United States of America. For those of you who aren't au fait with today's guest, I'll just walk you through her long and distinguished background and experience. Lily de Los Rios is Vice President of Applications in the Products and Platforms Organizations at Unisys. In this role, she leads a global team responsible for the development of industry-specific products such as Elevate and AirCore and modern cloud-native platforms such as CloudForte and InteliServe. She is a passionate advocate for creating frictionless and delightful end-to-end customer experience that increases customer loyalty and lifetime value. Lily brings more than 30 years of experience spanning technical development, product management, and customer experience to her current position. Prior to Unisys, Lily served in various senior leadership roles at Symantec, a global leading provider of consumer and enterprise cybersecurity products and services. As Senior Vice President, Global Partner and Support Solutions for the Norton Business Unit, she delivered offerings tailored for B2B2C partners. She's also directed the development and operations of customer support tools and infrastructure. In her position as Vice President of Product Deliveries for Symantec Enterprise Business Unit, she headed the product management and development for Symantec Client Security and Norton AntiVirus. She organised and built Symantec Core Technology Group and Symantec Security Response. Lily received her Bachelor of Science in Maths and Computer Sciences and her Executive Leadership Program certificate from Stanford University. An active citizen in her community, Lily volunteered for local organisations such as American Youth Soccer Organisation and Westlake Choir. She's currently a board member at the non-profit Leadership California, whose mission is to increase representation and influence of diverse women leaders in California. Wow, Lily, what an impressive background that you have. Welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about your personal journey over these last 30 years.
Well, first of all, good day, Alex and Nick. A recent colleague of mine commented recently that the Aussies have perfected the greeting for a connected world. Instead of good afternoon, good morning, good evening, you can just say good day and be done.
Exactly. It's very efficient.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. I'm so excited to be a part of this remarkable series and be among so many of your distinguished guests. My journey here had been a long and global journey. As you mentioned, I was born in Vietnam and became a war refugee and immigrated to the U.S. As a refugee. And I think as an immigrant and as a refugee at a very young age, that experience, I think, had really colored and influenced how I think for the rest of my life. When I left home, I did not speak English. English is my third language. I left behind my father, so I came to the US with only my mother and younger brother, not speaking a word of English, not really understanding the culture, how things work here. And I really had to learn very quickly, both the language, the culture, and what it takes to be successful. And I think in that experience, I learned that resiliency and an open mindset and a willingness to learn has been very important throughout my personal as well as business professional career. Is to learn how to adapt to changes as well as learn new skill sets all along the way.
And Lily, normally Mick and I compete to ask the next question. So I said to you, this would be very organic. Thank you for sharing a bit about your background. There are so many questions I want to ask. I can only imagine, as you say, the resiliency and the barriers you had to face, not least cultural, but leaving behind family, learning a language, no doubt supporting, family. So what happened next? What then set you on the path to, and I'm sure there's many steps, as you've said, that have sort of then led you to the pathway professionally in terms of where you are in life now. What was kind of the next chapter for you?
Well, I think after coming to the US, coming from an Asian family, the expectation from my mother was I was going to be a doctor. So I went off to university. And by the way, that was all totally accidental as well. When I first came to the US, I came to Maryland, a suburb of, Silver Spring, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. And so I was fully expected to go to a university somewhere nearby. Well, it just so happened that the fall of my senior year, just before I applied to college, my mother and family was invited to visit a friend in California. So I came out and my mother said, I love it here in California. I wish I could stay, but my daughter's going to go off to college. And her friend said, well, there's this great university down the street from where I live called Stanford. Why don't you go check it out? And so this was over Christmas break. We jumped in the car, go checked it out. It was a beautiful campus. And I went into the admission office and they said, well, we just had to extend our application deadline because of some snafus. So you have an extra week to go and apply. And I said, great, I guess I'll go and apply. And actually, that's how I ended up at Stanford. And I think it put me in the right place at the right time. Because I went to Stanford all expecting to become a doctor one day. And yet I had a roommate who was studying to be an engineer. She was working on a problem from a computer science class. And I said, well, let me look at it and see if I can help you. And it turned out this really interesting problem. I said, I want to try out this class. And after trying out the class, I found it, wow, I really liked the subject. It came naturally to me, much easier than memorizing all of the functions of the human body and be able to recognize them by sight. And so I think that's how I did not become a doctor and went into computer science instead. And doing computer science at Stanford, when I did, was a wonderful opportunity for me because that was the birth of, around the I feel like Renaissance area of Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of growth and startups. So fresh out of Stanford, I was able to work at a small startup. And at a small startup, you learn all kinds of skill sets and experiences. You have to wear many different hats. And that provided a great learning experience for me and helped me understand and decide better where I wanted to go in my career, right? Being in an environment where there were just many opportunities to learn and explore.
Incredible background. And I mean, Stanford, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And, I think that's testimony to what you've achieved and that incredible journey you've been on. Now, as a computer scientist, then, is one of those three languages one of the computer science coding languages, or you're actually on top of that? Oh, and I'll throw that in jest because I'm assuming that it's not. You're a coder by DNA as well. Is that right, Lily?
Yes. My first language was Vietnam, and as you know, Vietnam was a French colony, so French was my second language. And then I made learning English a little bit easier. It did not make learning computer programming any easier, however.
No. Well done on that. Now, it's just fascinating how that one chain of events and that one example that you cast your mind back to, that you just realised that you had an appetite and an attraction to solving problems in that vein. But now let's jump into your career, because over the last 30 years, as we've read through, you've been working on the vendor or a vendor side, supporting institutions go through digital transformations. And I suppose where you started some decades ago till now, tell us about what some of those trends have been over time, because it feels like since, for the lay person who may not have been in technology transformation, but I remember those days when when the iPad first came out. Back some 13 years ago to where it is today, and we used to have these old Nokia phones that we loved back in the late 90s. Tell us about some of the trends you've seen and how rapidly you feel these things have evolved.
Well, I think I'll date myself even further back than that, Nick, because I just got a notification and a reminder that in 1968, on this date, an engineer by the name of Doug Engelbart demoed the first ever computer mouse at Stanford Research Institute. So who knew, right? And it's amazing to me that these days we all still use mouse, right? It works differently. It's not, doesn't have a trackball anymore on it, but we still have a mouse, as long with other methods for interacting with the computer system. So I think was really exciting for me was having gone to Stanford and really being there in Silicon Valley at the right place and the right time, allowed me to watch how technology and innovations has helped to make users' life simpler and easier, and add a lot more complexity along the way as well. When I was studying at Stanford, one of the computer environment I was working on was the first Macintosh, right? So the introduction of the Mac and its graphical user interface back then, and I think about today and everything we take for granted today, but back then it was so innovative, and its designers really could not have imagined all of the possibilities of how their innovation could be used today, right? And I think it's fascinating to have been there and watch how innovations drive additional innovations and push for additional changes in ways that I think maybe the original inventors never thought of. From, as you mentioned, so I started with the computer mouse and the graphical user interface. You talk about the phones with Nokia, and then the Apple phones, right? The Apple phones actually has only been out since for 13 years. I couldn't imagine that. I think my youngest daughter probably couldn't imagine that, because she's of the Gen Z digital generation who had never experienced a world without Amazon. It's flabbergasted me to think of that, but they've always had Amazon and they've always had the internet.
This is so fascinating, just to hear you reflect and on some of these experiences. The thread I want to pick up on, Lily, is that you've mentioned a couple of times in different ways, and I know you're super passionate about the consumer experience, like the human experience interacting with the tech and the role that plays. I'd love you to talk to us a bit about that, your passion for customer experience, because I know Mick and I ask so many of our thought leaders on this show about, what does digital transformation mean for you? And it's really fascinating, because I think so many times, people, and that's why I want to know your thoughts. So many of our guests say, well, yeah, it's about the tech, but it's actually not about the tech. It's actually about all these other things that make it, human and experiential. So tell us a bit about your passion for customer experience, and I guess what this phrase of digital transformation actually means to you when you hear that.
Yes, I think you nailed it, right? Digital transformation to me is all about first focusing on the customer, right? Solving their needs, and technology is just an enabler to help them solve their needs. And I'm particularly passionate about customer experience because, frankly, all of us are experts in customer experience, right? We all have an expectations of what the ideal customer experience should be. We want it to be simple, easy, and convenient. And yet, I think so many times companies who try to go and talk to their customer and say what it is you want, we have problems articulating our needs. And we can't always tell people how it is that we want, what it is that we want and how we want it delivered. We just know that we just want it, to do the things we needed to do. So at the very first station, we just need to meet our needs. And then the next thing is, it just really got to be easy. It shouldn't take a lot of effort. And then it would be really great if this is something that is actually enjoyable. And you saw a need that I didn't know I had. I think that's the magic of companies like Apple and Amazon, that some of their innovation has been able to solve needs that customers didn't know that they have or weren't able to articulate. And I think that's why customer experience and creating that experience is so fascinating to me, because it is about that technology, but there's a little bit of that art about experimentation and trial and errors and getting to what is that really solves the customer problems. And I know we all know a great experience when we see it, right? We get excited about it and we say we love it and we can't wait to tell our friends about it.
And if you cast your mind back, as an extension of this, in terms of this customer experience, which you're so passionate about, and it's coming through in every sentence. Thinking back 30 years to today, what are consumers' expectations now regarding customer experience?
Well, I think the introduction of the smartphone, as you mentioned, Nick, right, has made it so that customers are very impatient these days, and the bar has really been raised in customer experience. Amazon, Netflix, Apple has taught consumers to expect a really easy to use experience and very convenient. Anywhere, anytime, any channel device, right? If I wanted to watch it at home or on the road or via a tablet or via the phone or via my computer. And for a while, Netflix was still offering, actual in-person mailing of digital disc, right? So I think there's expectations from consumers these days are, wherever I want it to be, I want your service to be available for me. And sometimes, if you're a Gen Z, you may want to do everything online. And when it comes to banking, they've never written a check in their life, right? But when you think about more the baby boomers or other generations, they're more used to going to the banks and going to the branch office, an example, to do their transaction, or being on the phone to talk to someone. Yet the pandemic has forced all of us to change how we work. We couldn't go to the bank, and yes, you could call, but it's really long wait time on the phone. So you actually people have to adapt to new ways of working. And I think that's the fascination for me is, how do you then make the new way of working, the digital experience, works across all of these different consumer personas with different experience and background, and make that a customized experience for the users themselves, because they don't care about anybody else. They just want to care about their own experience, however they wanted to have it.
So, Lily, you've just asked the question, so I'm going to say yes. And what's the answer? How do you do that? Because, you know, and I'm not expecting, you know, a catch-all, but it's such a fascinating piece of this for me as well, because, and not just from a consumer experience, but just as you've touched on a couple of times about innovation and experience. So I'd like to kind of know two things. One, what is your experience of how you actually deliver to consumers who want something that suits them and they don't care about anyone else? But how do you internally, like from an organizational perspective, how do you start to get the culture and really cultivate that in your own team and your own culture to be able to innovate and maybe make mistakes and respond to consumers and try different things? Because I think that in itself, I mean, that's huge without, let alone, you know, meeting consumer expectations.
Yes, I think you've nailed it, Alex, because I learned throughout my career that very quickly that technology is not the answer. Actually, it is, as mentioned earlier, is an enabler, but there's so many other components to building a great consumer experience, right? And it actually starts when I think about, again, in a bank, thinking about their own offerings, right? Is it simple? Is it easy for customer to understand? Think about their own internal processes, right? What are all the different steps that they have to go through, that they make the customers go through? How can we simplify all of that? And then last but not least, I think the culture and the fact that banks and have smaller organizations within, and there's natural silos within those organizations. And yet our customers don't see those different organizations. They see the bank as one entity, and they expect that one entity to know everything about them and is out and ready to service them. So how do you build a culture that then look at a customer holistically and view their journey and their experience with the bank through all the touch points as one person? And they're looking, and so as a bank, how do you build that one consistent experience? Well, you have to have a culture internally that enables that, right? That it is okay for me to help make a suggestion somewhere else in the process, because when a customer comes to me, I will be in a better position to help them if early in the process we had collected information or we had known something else about the customer, and then it enables me to help the customer better later in the process.
And there's so much to that, isn't there? Because as you say, I mean, yes, we'd all agree, yes, it's about culture. But I mean, I think we all know if you've ever led other human beings or been part of a team, you know, you can't just say it's okay to innovate or make a suggestion, or like, it's that actions and words that have really always got to line up in terms of, yes, this is what builds the culture of innovation. Do you think, you know, from a staff perspective, or, you know, your internal culture, what do you think the barriers are to progression, you know, whether it be around technology or responding to consumers or what your customers ask? Do you see any barriers internally in organizations that stop them really embracing innovation and technology?
Yes, I think some of those barriers come from a fear of change, right? And so I think a lot of time when I see these barriers, it's really more that an organization is reluctant to change how they work. And so that stops them from thinking in new ways, because they say that it's too hard or it won't give the results that we wanted. So I think the willingness to change and experiment and learn is very important. And I think banks are naturally very risk averse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're one of the most conservative sectors ever. Do you think, so, I'm interested in, again, we're probably going a bit all over the place, but just if you think about what you touched on before about the year that we've had, global pandemic, we know, and you were mentioning before, it's affected so many things. It's the way we work, the way we communicate. It's forced us to, in our own businesses, change how we deliver services, like everything. From a bank perspective, do you think has there been a marked change in terms of what consumers are demanding of their banks in terms of the experience? Like, what do you think banks are going to really focus on in the year ahead to really respond, I guess, to some of the changes that the pandemic's really forced on all of us?
So at Unisys, we have looked at some recent studies about where banks want to focus their effort. And number one is in the onboarding journey. And then two is just growing this mobile online banking as a channel. And the third area is around lending and credit risk. And we're lucky at Unisys to have the opportunity to partner with Sandstone Technologies to provide a solution to solve this very digital banking problems for our customers. And in particular, that onboarding journey is very critical because that's where new customers will abandon the process very quickly if it's too difficult or too long. There's so many other options out there. I think that's the challenge for banks is there are a lot of neobanks out there that are already completely digital and online. So you can't compete with that. You might lose new customers and you might also lose existing customers if they have a bad experience. So we often talk around kind of onboarding as creating an omni-channel journey for customers that regardless of where they start, we should allow them to switch from if they started online and they want to go to the bank to complete it, they should be able to do that. If they start on the phone or start online but have some problems, they should be able to call and get support and help and take them all the way through. And they shouldn't have to restart their journey. Right? If they were able to complete up to entering certain set of information, we should be able to save them and then pick them up from where they left their journey, regardless of the channel. And I think that's an important part of the digital banking experience is to connect with the customers and then help them through the journey as quickly as possible.
Now, apologies, guys. I had a couple of technical difficulties, which no doubt you could have gleaned from the fact that I logged off. I've had to come back in on the phone. Appreciate the quality of picture may be compromised somewhat. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can. We roll with it. It's a live show, so let's just go with it.
Indeed. No, indeed. Okay, so I think I heard this about onboarding and the importance of onboarding. Why do banks need to focus on this particular area and ensuring they can improve that experience? Lily, you guys are obviously working with many banks globally and have wonderful insights and very decorated background in supporting banks to make that transition. Why is it so important to improve this experience?
Well, I think we talked earlier about how consumers' expectations these days are for things to be simple, easy, and fast, and convenient. Right.
And it's interesting. Sorry, it's really interesting, right? I was listening to you before when you were saying about the Gen Zs, and it's quite incredible because our youngest daughter, we've got 3 as well, and our youngest is nearly 3. But the ability to navigate the phone, she'll go straight to her phone in the morning and get on YouTube for Kids and be able to link it up and watch her shows is quite extraordinary. So by the time she's 10 or 15, to contemplate that they never had it, that they didn't have a phone or without technology is quite extraordinary. So I was just relating to the fact your youngest daughter, she's obviously been through this journey. So they expect instant gratification each time. So I can imagine now when they become of an account opening age for a bank account, it's going to be very different what their expectations are relative to how it's played out in the past. Apologies. It prompted my thought before because I meant to jump in.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I recently went through this whole experience myself. As a result of the pandemic, I think some of the opportunities that we had was that mortgage interest rate was at the lowest point ever in the US. And so my husband and I decided we're going to take advantage of this opportunity to consolidate a couple of loans we have on our home and refinance. And there was a special deal at a major bank that, look, you will, if you refinance with us and if you have an account with us, you can get a special rate. So I complete the mortgage application process online with some help with some phone calls. They did ask me to fax in some documents, and I go, who has faxes still these days? Can I just email some documents?
Did you actually just say fax?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not a Gen Z, but that's even weird for me.
But then, they say, well, I'm sorry, but in order to open an account, you actually have to come into the branch in person. And of course, we're in shutdown, and so you couldn't just walk in at any branch. Only some branches are open, so you have to find the right branch that is still open, and then you have to make an appointment, and you go in. And then I realized that because I'm opening a joint account with my husband, he also needed to go in. And that entire process took weeks to get done. Right? And then next, it came time that we were going to make payments on our mortgage. And they said, great, let's do some transfer from this account that we already have the bank to make payment on my mortgage loan. And I realized, oh, well, no, there's limits in terms of how much money you can transfer, and you only open a savings account. You really need a checking account. I said, great, I love to open a checking account. And I tried to do it online and received errors and just say your checking account cannot be open at this time. I said, well, all right, maybe it's time of the day, right? Maybe the bank is, I tend to do things like this at about 11 p.m. my time when things quiet down. And so I said, well, I'm just going to wait until try it again another time. And after a number of failures, I called the bank and said, sorry, you have to come in again. I said, but why do I have to come in? You already know who I am. I have an account already. And credit cards with you. Why can't you just open a checking account for me? Oh, no, you have to come in. So I have to come in. Then I also learned that there's, again, this ceiling on monetary transfer from one account to another. So to do all those things, you have to do it in person. So I think it's very difficult and take too long. And I think if I had been a Gen Z, like one of my daughters, I would have given up. And it was interesting that one of my daughters recently decided she needs to get a credit card to build account histories, right? And you know what she did? She actually went to her iPhone and applied for an Apple card. And in the US, it's a 5-step process, and she was able to do it in 5 minutes. And when I think about her experience taking 5 minutes, and mine was over weeks and weeks and many hours, countless hours, I don't think I kept track. That's the bar that a company like Apple's and some of the new financial banks that are all online are now setting and creating the expectations. And so it's a challenge for us to create that easy, seamless experience for customers as well. And not only with onboarding, I think that started, but I think there's really great opportunities down the road for things, again, similar to what internet giants have already done, offering proactive recommendations. Some predictive analytics. You know that I have a daughter this age, maybe I'm going to be looking to save money for college, right? And you talk about your 3-year-old daughter. If they have information, maybe the bank could recommend a savings plan for you to put away money for your daughter in the future. So I think their onboarding is the first step. But I think there's so many more that we can do as part of digital transformation and the digital customer experience to take the banking experience to really the next level of what consumers expect these days.
It's so interesting hearing you recount that. I know we're all having a bit of a laugh about facts, really, but I think you're right. It's almost something, as we've talked about, it transcends age or generation almost now, doesn't it? Because you get so used to, and I love how you said before, Lily, that we're all experts in customer experience because we're all customers. But just the thought of that, so old fashioned. And, Mick, you and I talk a lot about the friction in the process that, you can't have this beautiful front end or a beautiful app and then make someone go into a branch, or like it just really jars. And as you say, Lily, there are too many choices now for organisations to not take this seriously. I just wanted to quickly ask a question and then I'll hand to you, Mick. Just your reference to the Apple Card experience, when you're looking at what you develop and innovation and all those sorts of things, are there other industries that you take cues from or that you look to outside of the most obvious ones to go, oh, that's super interesting what they're doing there, and we can use something from a different industry to spark innovation or different experiences with what we're doing?
Absolutely. And I think, again, Amazon and Netflix are great examples of those. Amazon proactively recommend what are things you may want to buy from them. Netflix often say, we have a movie that we've just added we thought you might like. Here's what we would recommend for you. So I think similarly, there are things we can do in digital banking that take the experience to the next level beyond just the basic services that we offer today in terms of banking and loan. But how can we be more proactive? How can we anticipate the support and needs and offer up options for them? Offer up if we see, I would love it. For example, my bank tells me, the interest rate has dropped and there's an opportunity to refinance with us, and here's our offer for you as a long value customer, right? So I didn't have to switch to another bank and open a whole brand new set of accounts to take advantage of lower interest rates.
And Lily, you know what? Time has raced by when we're getting to the final minutes. It's phenomenal how quickly it's gone. I've got one more question before I'll throw to Alex to kick off the Fast Five. If you think about, we spoke about the mobile evolution of the old analog phones to then the smartphone, and once upon a time, it was mobile first, then mobile only, in the sense of different e-commerce strategies. What do you think from a banking perspective? Is it mobile first? Is it mobile only? What's the right play in today's world?
The right play depends on who your customers are. And it goes back to customers want to be wherever they want it to be. And I think for what we would say it's the mobile first or mobile only, but as you see, pandemic forces everybody to be from home. And so then you start seeing people buying more desktops and laptops just because they're more powerful. It's a bigger screen, right? I have two screens in front of me, so it's really wonderful to be able to take advantage of that. So I think it's wherever the customers are, we want to be there with them, right? And leveraging whatever technologies they're confident with and familiar with using. Going back to Alex, your question, we want to take lessons from industries and experience and models that customers are already familiar with. And if we can bring it to banking, then it makes the learning curve that much simpler and easier. And it removes one of the barriers to adoption.
Absolutely. And this is the thing with banking, as we often talk about, I mean, it's something we do in everyday life. So it should integrate into our everyday life. So I love your answer to Mick's question about it should be whatever your customers are asking of you. So Lily, as Mick said, we run out of time quickly on this show, and we do have a bit of fun at the end with our Fast Five. I think we started out with Fast 10, Mick, and then went, okay, we don't have time for Fast 10. So You're off the hook for 5 questions, Lily. But I was saying to you before we went live, I'm always so curious about, our beautiful community. They love to hear a bit about, your lived experience and wisdom and all sorts of things. So one of the questions I actually want to start with you today is, you and I had briefly mentioned before we went on air that, that this year's been so interesting for all of us in different ways, and that one of the I guess the beautiful things for you is that you've had your 3 daughters back at home. But we were also talking about the fact that, it's very hard, the elusive work-life balance, if it exists, especially when you're working in the home office, and you can very easily do 18-hour days and all those sorts of things. So how have you protected your energy? How do you make sure that you have that separation? What are some of the things that you do to actually try and make sure you fill your cup so you can keep performing at your best?
Well, I am very lucky to have the support of my family. And we have, since the pandemic, started a family tradition of taking walks together. My father now lives with me, and he's 91. So it's a good form of exercise for him to get out. He's still very mobile. He's not on any medication. He gets on his bike once a day, but it's really great living here in California. We have beautiful weather, and when the weather is nice and we're not fleeing fires, we can go out and take walks. So the family is very good about saying, it's about 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon, good time to take, a good 15, 20 minutes walk. And it's great for your health, and it's also a great opportunity for the family to bond together as well.
No, that's terrific, and obviously testimony. Fantastic to hear that your father's going strong at 91. That's inspiring, I think, to all of us before him. Now, in terms of thinking through your career or even outside, who's been a wonderful influence on your career?
Well, I think the top influencer, particularly from a leadership standpoint, is somebody by the name of John W. Thompson. He's currently the chairman of Microsoft. I was fortunate to work for him when he was the CEO and chairman at Symantec. And I learned really, I think, many, many valuable leadership lessons from John. There were 2 that I would say really stick out very strongly with me. One is to always be humble. So humility is really important. And then 2, he would say, never do something that you can't go and look at yourself in the mirror afterwards. So I felt like that's always really great advice and guidance sometimes when you're faced with tough situations and trying to make tough decisions. You always think about, well, how do I live with myself, as I make this decision?
I think that's great, isn't it? And you need that North Star sometimes, and you come back to those fundamental things. So the question I've got for you, so we have a lot in our audience, we have a lot of very senior leaders, but also lots of up and coming emerging leaders at various stages of their career. Is there a piece of advice or an insight that you'd give to someone who is starting out in their career?
Well, I think probably 2 key things for me is that sometimes you may feel like you're taking a step forward, but it's really a launching pad. It's really to enable you new skills to take a new positions. And there are times in my career when, for instance, when I switched company very early on in my career, I was a manager, and I stepped back and took an individual contributor role at a different company because I knew that I could grow there into more management and leadership roles and get the training and support that I need to become a great leader. And I think your career is not always a straight shoot up the ladder, but may take some sideway path. But that's okay, as long as you're willing to learn and pick up new skills. And I think that's the other thing, is sometimes making changes rather scary. But I think if you come in with an open mind and be willing to learn new things, I think it can open up your horizon and future.
I love hearing that. That's I'm no doubt you're very well aware of Anne Bowden, who's the CEO and founder for Starling Bank and the first, I think, female founder of a bank over in the UK. And her advice is very similar. She said, a lot of people think that they look at people's careers and they're linear in terms of their trajectory going up and up and up, but that's absolutely not how it works. So no, love that piece of advice. I think it's a great reflection for all of us. Last one from me. What's a wonderful book that you'd recommend to our audience to read that has given you great insights?
I am a huge fan of science fiction. And so one of my great favorite novels is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I think what's great about it is, even though it's science fiction, it's very much a story about people. And I think at the end of the day, as we talked about technology, it still comes down to people, how we act, our culture, our behaviors. Technologies is simply an enabler.
No, I love that. Last one from me, and then we'll let you go. So we talk a lot here about reframing this concept of failure, that actually you can't get anywhere in life without falling down, making mistakes. How do you define failure? And can you think of, we like to ask about your best failures at some point in your career that you've looked back and learned from?
I've had so many. I think I'm always reminded of Thomas Edison's quote, right? Innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And it talks about how many times that he tried and experiment different setup. And I think that's what we have to be willing to do. And I think of failures, not so much in terms of failures, actually. I think about lessons learned. Wow, what did I learn that time when that approach didn't work for me? What am I going to do differently next time? And I think that's how I look at failures. Is actually, I don't think of them as failures. I just think about, I've just eliminated a possibility. That way it doesn't work. I'm going to try something new.
Well, Lily de Los Rios, that's been inspirational listening to you, hearing your insights about your experience from being humble to, you ooze humility, and you've achieved so much in your technology career and obviously helped so many people along the way. And I love to hear all this message around the customer. It's all about the customer experience. And I think that's just overridden all of us today. And look, it's been a pleasure to have you on board. I think we'd love to we do sometimes request at the push from our audience to bring our guests back, and I think you'll be one of those that will be banging on your door early next year after Christmas to request that you come back and grace us with your presence again. Thank you so much for giving your time. This is Digital First, a banking transformation series. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Mick, and thank you, Lily. It's been an absolute pleasure. We so enjoyed talking to you, and thank you, everyone tuning in. We know we appreciate that you choose to watch our show amongst all the things that you could have going on in your world. As a quick wind up, as always, we have so many things happening. Next week is our last week for this year, and we are going to hit the 100th episode with Chris Skinner on Wednesday. So as a quick reminder, we're back on Tuesday with Yolanda. That's going to be an amazing conversation with someone who's passionate about leadership, speaking, all sorts of things around gender equality and inclusion. And then, of course, Mick and I will take it home before Christmas with Chris, who's going to be streaming live from Poland. So hence our 9 p.m. Australian time, I should say Eastern Standard Time, for next Wednesday. And of course, next week also, it's our last circles for the year. So for all our members, if you want to check in with us for a final circle, we're having, of course, Monday and our fast track one on Thursday morning. Monday is going to be great because I've got Penny Lovett with me on Monday, who's one of our advisory board members, an incredibly experienced and inspirational leader in her own right. And of course, the circles, if you haven't been there yet, we talk about anything and everything. We make really intentional connections, and they're confidential sessions. So please, if you'd like to come, do register via the platform, because places do go really fast for those. And the final word from me is thank you, as I say every day, to our amazing corporate partners. We would not be here without you, and you're such a big part of this community. So thank you, Mick. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, everyone. Have a brilliant day and, of course, weekend, and we'll see you next week. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.